All right. Oh, it's automatic. There you go. So it's on recording. I'm actually going to do the launch on Facebook as well. People are joining, so you can say hello to them.
Hello.
Hello. Hi.
Hi,
Welcome.
everybody.
Hi, friends. Welcome.
We're so excited to see so much interest in our Theory Tuesday webinars.
Fantastic.
And we know that there are people from all over the world. So let us know in the chat where you're from, and welcome friends, old friends, new friends. Thank you guys for joining us. All right, so once
We're just waiting on Facebook, and we're live on Facebook too. So you're
right.
welcome to start,
Cool.
Suzanne, Zoe. Thank you.
All right, welcome
Thanks, Marco.
everybody. Let me pull up my my introduction. Here we go. Okay, I'm sharing right now. And here we go. So I want to thank everybody for being here, particularly our speakers, and also Mark Hamilton, who's representing Southpaw Enterprises, who's been a very generous sponsor and supporter of sensory integration for many decades. And of course, my partner in crime, Dr. Zoe Mayu, who's here. Zoe, I don't know if you want to say a little something.
Yes. Well, welcome everyone, all our friends from around the world. And again, it's just this, we started doing some webinars during the pandemic, and it was such a great experience that we're happy to have the chance to be with everyone again in this format.
So this is the first of our webinar series, Theory Tuesday. So our focus is going to be on those complex neurobiological foundations that inform us about sensory integration theory. And you know, we do have dates, and I'll show you that later, but let's get into introducing our speakers.
Okay, so I am really honored to introduce our very close colleague and great friend, Dr. Diane Parham. And we're not going to read all her many accomplishments. I'm sure that everyone who's attending probably knows already a lot about Diane. But I feel like we're soul sisters. We go back so far, and it's just been an amazing journey to see all that you've done for occupational therapy, for sensory integration, for children all over the world. So we're thrilled to have you, Diane. She's one of the authors of the evaluation in Ayres Sensory Integration. I don't know if we even have that on her bio. She's done so much. So anyway, we can't wait to hear from you this evening. And thank you so much for being with us and for all you've done.
Oh, thank you, Zoe. And I think I could do the same kind of introduction to you as well. I think all the things you were saying apply to you as well. It's good. It's good. Okay, so I will
Well,
jump.
hang on, Diane. I'm going to introduce Connie really quick. Then we're
Perfect,
going to go
okay.
into yours. Okay, so and I get the honor to introduce our dear friend and colleague, Dr. Connie Lillas, and possibly many of you don't know her. I first met Connie when she was creating an infant mental health program that was multidisciplinary. And I have to tell you that in our practice, Centerpoint for Children, we're still using much of the information that this multidisciplinary team of mental health workers and occupational therapists learned from the resources that Connie put together. And more recently, Connie and I had a mutual client, and I was so excited to hear what she was doing. And so she was gracious enough to come and join us. And of course, since that infant mental health, she published a text that's fabulous, and she has a center, got her PhD in psychology. And so anyway, welcome, Connie.
Thank you so much. It's so fun to be with you all again.
Yeah. Okay.
Such a pleasure.
All right, so I just want to remind everybody, don't leave, because right at the end, we have a raffle. And so we will be pulling the name for a lovely gift that was donated by Southpaw. So don't leave till the end. If you have to, of course, it'll be recorded, but you won't be part of the raffle. Okay, so here we go, Diane. I'm going to turn it over to you. And I think, you know, as I know you have slides prepared, but we had talked about this being a little bit of a discussion. And so one of the things that I had hoped that Diane might do for all of us is just to go through a little bit of the history and foundation in this construct of sensory reactivity as it relates to an Ayres sensory integration perspective. So here you go, Diane.
All right, thank you. So it was challenging to come up with just 3 slides, by the way. So, right, because this is such a complex topic. So I'm just going to hit on this. This is sort of like basic neuro, you know, background. Some of you are very familiar with this, but it may be new to some of you. So first of all, there are peripheral events in which sensory stimuli are detected and moved into the central nervous system. So there's detection from the peripheral nervous system. And then once it goes into that nervous system, that central nervous system, there will be, if all is working well, there will be attention given to the stimulus, especially if it's novel or different or could be interpreted by the brain as maybe threatening. Okay, so that's going to be alerting, and then there will be attending to the stimulus. Now, if it's a stimulus that's very, very ordinary that you encounter many times a day, you won't even notice it. Your brain is very efficient and noting that it is a very, very familiar stimulus, and so there's no need to get alerted to it. Okay. So this is a, you know, very complex process. And so we have the peripheral nervous system, just a little reminder that the neurons that are detecting sensations are embedded in the skin, the muscles, and other structures of the body, including internal organs, by the way. Okay. And then the brain is going to be receiving these messages. And then the central nervous system, especially the brain, the higher levels, are going to be processing it. And this processing and interpretation that the brain does may lead to either alerting or calming responses, or maybe just a neutral, no need to change, you know, your current state of arousal or state of alertness. Okay, so we have these complex events happening, and I kind of think of the brain as first perceiving the information, trying to make sense of it, and then interpreting, what does this mean to me in my situation right now, based on past experiences. So memory is part of that, and then that will guide action. So some of the questions that the brain sort of posing to itself and answering is this sensation familiar to me, or is it entirely novel? Is it completely new experience? In which case I might have to investigate further what's going on. How strongly does this sensation affect me? Is it so familiar that I'm not really having to pay much attention to it? Or is it something really different? And so it's grabbing my attention and I need to figure out what this is and how best to respond. So my third point here is, well, does this stimulus, this is the brain thinking this through, okay, does this make me feel safe and comfortable? Or is this a little scary? And am I feeling threatened? And this, of course, is going to be strongly related to past experiences, the way this interpretation takes place. So should I lash out, hit or kick to protect myself? Should I run away or get away from that stimulus or hide from whatever the source is? Or conversely, is this a really pleasant sensation? Do I want more of this? Do I want to hang out with this? Does it feel really good to me? Okay, let's have the next slide then. Okay, so that was sort of like theory in a nutshell. And I do want to actually mention before I go over this slide that there are probably multiple reasons why reactivity difficulties may be experienced by some individuals, and it can emerge in infancy or later on in life. So, temperament is an inherited sort of personality. There's a whole spectrum of different temperaments, different kinds of personality. And so it could be that heightened sensory reactivity, such as tactile defensiveness, it could possibly, and I'm just, wondering this, I don't have research behind what I'm about to say, that it could be an inherited trait. Okay, because it does seem to, kind of my informal observation, it seems to run in families sometimes. Okay, so that could be what's going on there. Also, history of trauma or abuse. I think Connie might be talking about this quite a bit, but that's going to have a profound effect on being able to regulate your responses to sensory experiences. And you do have some people who have just they seem to just from very early in life have heightened arousal, heightened reactivity, and we would call them overly sensitive. So let's get into assessment now. Just in a nutshell, just to distill it down to basic concepts here, first of all, consider the presenting problems. So is reactivity interfering or affecting the daily life events of the infant, the toddler, child, adolescent, or adult, whatever age, because this can be an issue at any age. So what are those challenges that might be related to sensory reactivity? What's going on in everyday life? You want to find that out. And in the challenges, think about the sensory reactivity. It may not be an issue, but it might be, and you'll want to address that if it is. You may have to do a little bit of sleuthing, interviewing, maybe observing. And there are other methods you can use too. So in addition to directly observing the person, I'm saying in this slide here, child, but it could be an adolescent or adult as well, or an infant, okay? Direct observations, very, very important if in the natural environment, okay? An informal interview with a significant adult, and if it's a child, it would be probably the caregiver, the primary caregiver, or other significant person, could be child or adolescent. And in addition to observing and interviewing, we do have norm referenced assessment tools, the EASY and the SPM2. And the EASY is direct observation, okay, and your scoring responses. The SPM2 is a questionnaire that someone would fill out to rate that person, or if the child, adolescent, or adult is able to read and understand and can rate themselves, that's an option also on the SPM2. Okay, so interventions. The first things that come to my mind are Ayres Sensory Integration intervention, because after all, Ayres is the person who initially identified sensory reactivity issues as a concern for occupational therapists and other professionals who work with people of all ages, actually. One thing that probably most of you know this already, but I thought it was important enough to mention is that Ayres Sensory Integration intervention is now identified and accepted as an evidence-based practice for children with autism spectrum disorders. And it's supported by at least 3 high-quality research studies that were using randomized trials. Also, Ayres Sensory Integration may be effective, and actually the research would suggest this, for many children who have sensory reactivity difficulties, as well as other challenges such as poor motor coordination, even if their intellectual ability is normal. So we're very, very confident now about the effectiveness of Ayres Sensory Integration. Another intervention I want to mention that could be helpful for many children who have reactivity difficulties is the alert program for self-regulation. And the nickname is How Does Your Engine Run? It's a metaphor used in this intervention that you kind of assess yourself. Is it sort of like your internal engine is revved up, over revved up, and maybe you need to calm yourself down? Or is it running really low and you need to increase your level of attention and alertness? And this is also an evidence-based practice that has research behind it. And it does emphasize the child's ability to recognize their own sensory reactions so that they can regulate themselves. And there actually is a menu of sensory strategies, but of course, you want to support the child to come up with their own strategies that would work for them as well. Okay, so I'm going to turn this over to Connie now.
Okay, let me share screen, and I'm delighted again to be here. And I'm going to go to my slideshow. So I want to zoom out for a minute and actually start with the idea that SI has had a long road to toe, and I am so delighted to hear that you have evidence-based and you are being acknowledged by the whole world for being valid and being a treatment and being, now accepted in the community. This has been just a wonderful event that this has happened over the arduous work that these women on this call and others have put into this. I want to step back and zoom out for a minute and say, in the battles that have happened with, can sensory integration, is it evidence-based? Can it be a diagnosis? The National Institute of Health and Mental Health in 2013 actually said they were no longer going to support the DSM, the diagnostic classification system for mental health research, that they are moving away from these categorical diagnostic categories into research domain criteria. And I wanted you to see that these research domain criteria that are listed here include arousal regulatory systems and sensory motor systems, which means these are now being acknowledged on a National Institute level in the US as transdisciplinary and transdiagnostic processes, which really is fantastic, because what that means is that these processes actually underlie every single diagnosis you could have. So even though a lot of our EBTs are really focused on having to say, you can use this for this diagnostic category, the good news is what's coming down the pike, and hopefully I'm hoping that the neuroinitial framework, which is what I've co-authored and authored, will become an evidence-based treatment that operationalizes the RDoCs. These are referred to RDoCs, research domain criteria. So in that sense, the idea here that autonomic and sensory motor processes underlie all diagnoses is really pivotal to shift, for us to start to think about dimensions instead of categories. So this idea that the autonomic nervous system is a transdisciplinary, transdiagnostic concept, the fancy term for toxic stress is allostatic load. Some of you may have heard it, some of you may not have. We just use, in informing people, we just refer to toxic stress. But again, it's an underlying dimension to any diagnosis. And what that means is we can start bridging the neurodivergent worlds and the mental health worlds with much more assuredness that these dynamics underlie, whether you're neurodivergent, whether you've had trauma, they apply to all categories. So the other comment that I want to make is that states of arousal have distributed properties, which means they reside in the autonomic nervous system, which is a subset of the central nervous system, but they also hold dynamic processes that relate directly to the degree of alertness to sensory stimulation, the degree of emotional reactivity, the degree of motor activity. So it's again a distributed concept which cuts across, potentially our neurodivergent focus on perhaps, sensory reactivity, but also the mental health, which tends to focus on emotional reactivity, and motor is everything. Motor is underlying all of us in terms of our ability to move. So in terms of then how we might apply understanding and bringing the autonomic nervous system and wetting that, so to speak, with sensory integration and sensory motor functioning, I'm going to just talk a little bit about the autonomic nervous system and the fact that this idea of what Diane mentioned was, what's the impact of sensations? Do they help you feel safe and comfortable? Are they like ho-hum and they're neutral and you don't really have a reaction because you've habituated to them, and they're not necessarily something that is novel or a preference or threatening? But then in terms of challenge and threat, how might a sensation affect your nervous system, your autonomic nervous system, which is your automatic nervous system? So these stress responses happen automatically. They come from what we would call a bottom-up part of our brains instead of our thoughtful top-down part of our brains, and that they can happen. And our body, and the first thing we try to do is really reframe that behavior starts bottom up, starts in our bodies. So much of children's behavior is thought of as willful, disobedient, defiant, non-compliant. And we get these labels with really young children when it's not possible neurodevelopmentally that they have cortical capacities to be thoughtfully trying to defy you, or willfully trying to make your life miserable, or willfully trying to be non-compliant. But our culture has not always made that shift. So one of the first things we have to do sometimes with our families is help them understand that challenging behavior emerges from our bodies. It can be automatic, and that we want to start to understand, when are they telling us that they feel safe? And ultimately, which sensations are helping them feel safe? And I refer to those as sensory preferences. Which of them sensations might be, whether it's coming from the outside world or your interoceptive internal world, experienced as challenging, and which might be in fact triggering threat. So this kind of intensity scale is paired to match safety, challenge, stress challenge, and threat. Now, the reason for the two-way sign here is that ultimately we want to help our children build stress challenge. We want them to be able to build resilience, which is the ability to have an adverse experience and to recover and get back to safety. And we want to build stress tolerance by being able to have some capacity for a stress response, but when possible, avoiding threat. So let's talk a little bit more about what happens and how do we understand what safety is. Safety from the autonomic nervous system's point of view is, first of all, being able to cycle into deep sleep. Sleep is the background to our wake states and to our sensory thresholds. And so we want to support the sleep cycle. I always recommend doing a sleep assessment at the front end to know, is there enough good sleep, quality and quantity, to support your autonomic nervous system, which holds your sensory thresholds, so that you will understand how much reserves or how much body budget you have to keep yourself in the green zone, to be able to experience safety during the day, or your thresholds will be lowered when you don't have a good sleep support. green zone represents the autonomic nervous system being in a stable place with a good parasympathetic vagal tone. If you've followed Dr. Stephen Porges's work and polyvagal theory at all, that you want to have a good vagal break supporting you to be able to stay green and to be able to modulate your sensory experiences within that green zone. However, when we start to have challenge then and threat, we're going to look next to see what those look like. But safety then is defined by the autonomic nervous system is cycling into deep sleep and being able to have a stable, regulated green zone. So how do we assess for challenge and threat? From the framework that I've co-authored, we've really color-coded the autonomic nervous system. And I know there's other color coding systems that are out there, but ours are highly tied to the ANS, autonomic nervous system. That's the acronym I'll use. And we have 4 primary stress responses that we're looking at. The reds are the sympathetic side, which is that gas pedal that's just going full throttle. And you can have a really happy-go-lucky kid who's jumping off the couches and maybe a sensory seeker, but also may just be also stuck sympathetically with that gas pedal on. And they are hyperactive. And then you can have, that can flip quickly into the fight flight, which all of us used to know stress was fight flight. It's now, again, been expanded into all these other different states of arousal, but that's the traditional quote unquote tantrum, being aggressive, fight flight, which is a negatively valenced experience. That braking system, that parasympathetic side, can shut you down and put you into a blue zone, which again has its own physiology and biomarkers to it. And then what's least known in the stress world is that actually the gas and the brake can be on at the same time. It's not as common as the all or nothing sympathetic gas pedal on or the parasympathetic brake pedal on, but you actually can have the gas and the brake on in varying degrees at the same time. And we're hypothesizing that that also can hold an anxiety continuum from quiet hypervigilance, where you're more immobilized, to active panic, where you're more mobilized, but it's an anxiety-based continuum. So what do these stress states of arousal really look like? We have organized them, taking infant research that started with the early pioneers who were looking at states of arousal, T. Barry Brazelton, Prechtel from the Netherlands, and others, Edtronic, throughout the years, pioneers in infant research, and have really pulled together the biomarkers of what each zone looks like so that you can identify where's your child, where do you see your child when they might be in a condition of challenge or threat. And rather than thinking that they're willfully trying to be non-compliant, it's an automatic stress response we want to start to become conscious of. So this is now a blown up example. These are all nonverbal cues that can cluster together into these zones, if you will, these states of arousal that cluster together with the eyes, the facial features, vocal tones, rhythms, our gestures, body movements, our respiratory. And of course, underneath that is our heart rate and our interoceptive system, which is the sympathetic side, is going to constrict your bowel movements and lead towards constipation. If you are highly sympathetically driven, it tightens everything up, whereas the brake pedal loosens everything up. It relaxes and loosens the motor muscles interoceptively. So we start to identify, what do we see? And then how do we know whether it's adaptive stress, which is stress challenge, which we all want to be able to do and building our stress challenge capacity, or are we in toxic stress? These are Mr. Allostatic loads for toxic stress pattern. That happens to be Bruce McEwen. He's passed away now, but he spent his life's work studying toxic stress. And these are the 4 patterns that we now take our colors and help us operationalize. So pattern 1 is too frequent or too intense. Pattern 2 is the stress response lasts and stays on too long, to more than 20 minutes or so. Takes cortisol 20 minutes to help us with stress recovery, but it just goes on for 20, 40, an hour, hours at a time. Number 3, we do not habituate to normal things like transitions, and we stay sensitized and activated. And pattern 4 is that you just have a very narrow green zone, and 20% or less is where we're starting with in terms of trying to categorize how do we quantify things and actually study toxic stress, which we are embarking on this journey of getting into research base to study these states of arousal, and whether we can use states of arousal then to also provide evidence for the effectiveness and efficiency of the evidence-based treatments that we use. And then what do? Well, what do we do about it? These are 4 brain systems that are part of the neurorelational framework, and we go bottom up. We start with regulating that arousal system. What are the triggers? Where are the sensory reactivities? How sensorily defensive is this nervous system? We want to identify those. We want our parents, and as our children grow, for them to know that loud sounds, we can do something about it before we go to a birthday party. We don't have to have our children fall apart. We can get there early. We can help them wear a headset. We can help them prepare and get used to the sounds, you know, by staying in a particular part of the yard or a part of the house instead of being caught up with the fray, which will undo their regulatory system. And what are the sensory preferences that calm, that soothe, and get us back to green? So this is where we start, these 4 brain systems, the autonomic and the sensory motor loop here is very much a part of where we start treatment in any diagnostic category, regardless of what that is. We always start preparing and getting that nervous system regulated and in supporting joy so that we can provide good treatment based on the nervous system being organized and ready to take in the information in the context of play and relationships. And that is what I had to share. And this is our website. If you're interested in any of these materials, some of these are part of what's called a free starter kit. You're welcome to go to this website, go to the shop page, register for the starter kit, and you'll get 8 free handouts and 8 videos. And some of them, 6 or so out of the 8 have already been translated into Spanish, and the other 2 are about a few weeks away. And then the manual helps guide you through the process of using this framework. So I would love to open this up for conversation and dialogue and questions.
All right, thank you. Yeah, if you wanted to stop sharing, then we could probably just be all on the screen. Thank you so much. That was really a lot of information in a short amount of time. So one of the things that comes to my mind is how complex some of the clients are that we assess. And so we're using assessments like the EASY, looking at those sensory motor, discrimination, motor skills, praxis, reactivity, all of the patterns of sensory integration, and then interacting with those things that you were talking about in terms of challenging behaviors. And it's not always one thing. And so we see this enormous interaction between those kids who aren't sleeping, they're not pooping, they go from pooping to diarrhea, they're not eating, or they're not eating real food. The co-regulators, the human co-regulators in their life are worn out. And so, they're not necessarily getting great co-regulation because people are tired. So they're just trying to, kind of make them or use rewards for them to behave. So anyway, I just thank you because I think it really adds insights into the complexity.
I see something on the chat. Do we start
Sure,
responding?
dive in.
Oh, that went away. I didn't get a chance to read it.
If you pull up the chat room, it'll come up on the side of your screen.
Some questions in both the Q&A and also in the chat.
What do you do with teachers who can't adapt anxious ASD kids and the kids are failing? That's a big question.
To teachers who can't adapt to the challenging behaviors?
Yeah, the anxiety of their ASD kids.
Yeah, these principles from my end have to be where we apply them to ourselves first. So how do we help support teachers? And is there any co-regulators for those teachers who are anxious and overwhelmed, and help them get to a place of being able to stay green and calm enough? And then how do we start to understand and organize that classroom according to those high reactive, high red zone kids who are very quick to go into high intensity, those who are maybe perhaps under aroused, under reactive, and help them bring them up? And then how do we help the anxious children who are, hypervigilant and wary and also reactive as well? So I think that bringing SI into the classroom and bringing these guiding principles as to how do we understand even the rhythms and the pacing and the vocal tones, and how we approach the pacing of the day, and how do we build in sensory breaks. From my perspective, all of that needs to get into the classroom, just as how we might encourage a family, or how we would provide, again, sensory motor integration into a family system. And we do that through recess. We do that through what we do with the day, the lights, whether we use music, when we have quiet periods. That whole piece has to get brought into the classroom.
You know, one of the things that you pointed out, Connie, and I think Diane, you alluded to it, is from this point of view, from this theoretical point of view of looking at the biomarkers and the sensory motor foundations in the autonomic nervous system, we reframe those things that people call behavior. And usually when I'm being told that the child has behaviors, it's usually negative, like, well, they have a lot of behaviors. They're aggressive, or they're non-compliant or something. So I think reframing to have that understanding of that central nervous system, because then, if we can do our assessment and really understand deeply what's going on, then we can be more, customized. We can really be more direct about what we think is going to work. And then all of those tools that you've put together, then I think a lot of that's trial and error to see what's going to work when, which day, because in my experience, it fluctuates. It's not
Not static.
It's not static. It's by definition up and down. They're seeking one thing, they're avoiding the other, and one day it's fine, the next day it's not.
I do recommend, though, ideally, in an ideal world, if teachers could learn how to look at these states of arousal and think of creating a pie, creating a profile for each child as to where they trend, and starting to map out their classroom. Where are our highly reactive children, and do we cluster them together and have an aide that's really got her eye on those, or do we disperse them so that we can then better regulate? How can that teacher manage all of that? And we start to think about a trigger toolkit menu for each of those nervous systems, individualizing it. So over time, the teacher really has an understanding of this, but it takes that vision to want to put that work in at the front end to organize your classroom according to their autonomic and sensory reactivities.
I know I have a question for Connie, but I'm wondering if we should maybe, Marco, are there some questions that came earlier on that we should make sure get addressed first?
Yeah, that's a great idea. We have one question that refers to the alert program versus the zones of regulation. If there's, well, the question, why use one versus another? Diane, I don't know if you want to take on this.
Yeah, there are similarities, and I am not as familiar with the zones of regulation. So I don't know if anybody else want to comment on that. I know they are somewhat similar. So I don't know. I haven't seen the research in terms of effectiveness of zones, but I know a lot of people, it's very widely used, and a lot of people endorse that approach. So any of the other speakers know?
I think
Zones
it's,
real well?
yeah, I don't know it that well, but I think it's the concept of, you know, looking individually and just increasing awareness about self-awareness, especially
Yes.
about what things are calming, what things are alerting, and, you know, that those concepts are so important to be able to share and empower the individual as well as the caretakers around that person. To have that awareness. I think that's
Yeah.
the general principles that are important.
Yeah, and that's the same for the alert program as
right.
well. I think the zones are maybe a little bit more elaborate and a little bit more complex.
Specific. Kind of,
Yeah.
Well, they're both cognitive regulatory tools,
Yes.
right? And so I would say the therapists in our clinic use both of them interchangeably. Some of the kids don't want to hear anything about their engine and how it's running. So you have to modify some of that terminology, especially if they've had it a lot. But even, you know, the green zone or the red zone, and, you know, some of those that children get averse. But the idea, I think, is that three-part. One is self-awareness, that I think that the zones do a really nice job of. Second is those sensory regulatory tools. And the alert program has so many excellent ideas for those. And the third, with both of those tools, is to use them when you need it. And that's the hardest part for all of us, is to, when we're getting into a dysregulated state, to be able to access those very healthy regulatory tools. And I think often we need that other person. We need that co-regulator in our life who, you know, Connie, starting in infancy, who helps us understand how to take a deep breath, go sit on your peanut ball, you know, let's see what you need to do. Okay, you're going to feel better. Let's get a movement break before you take on that challenge.
I want to piggyback on that because zones of regulation is such a powerful tool in building that awareness. And I think that the tools that I have also complement that, because they take you deeper into the biomarkers so that you can actually identify the deeper biomarkers. But sometimes zones of regulation can, with the emphasis on self-regulation, can be create a conundrum for teachers, because if they're expecting the child to be able to self-regulate and the child is still in a bottom-up automatic stress response cycle, and they don't have the top-down capacities yet, they will need more of the co-regulatory perspective. And so then expecting the children to self-regulate, if they don't have yet enough cortical top-down capacities to use those tools, can get then the teachers into feeling like it's not working, or they resort then again back to timeouts. And the children get these colors on their board and they get turned to yellow. And if they don't get out of it on their own, they get sent away. So we have to be really careful as to being able to neurodevelopmentally match who our child is, who these children are, and do they have the capacity to self-regulate? And then if they don't, we help guide them into experiencing tools. As you said, Suzanne, let's do this together.
Yeah.
Let's have the whole classroom do this. Let's all take a breathing break. Let's all turn the lights down and be quiet and calm, so that we're building those tools with children who don't yet have that capacity to do it themselves.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to
Well,
bring your question. I have
I'll
a
ask
couple
my
more
question.
here.
I don't want to jump ahead of everybody else. So go ahead and maybe ask some of the others, and then I'll ask my question.
So there's a question and a follow-up question here from Carolina Lopez. She's saying Ayres Sensory Integration, is Ayres Sensory Integration enough to handle arousal regulation problems, or do you really need other frames of reference? And Carolina builds on our question saying, by including cortical awareness of sensations and preferences is an opposite idea to Ayres principles of sensory integration, generating subcortical adaptive responses. Do you want to? I don't know which of you want
Who's
to
gonna
take this one.
that?
Diane, you want to tackle that
Yeah,
one?
well, I'm thinking about it, and I'll have to think about whether, and you all can help me with this too, whether Ayres directly assess that. But I think it is inherent in Ayres sensory integration, because you're really working with finding, the just right challenge, right? At what level, what are the kinds of activities and situations where the child can really organize their behavior pretty well and successfully? And where's that challenge part where, what kind of situation is it that presents a challenge, right? Just a little bit beyond. So that idea of the just right challenge, I think, could apply to these issues that we're talking about here.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's Vygotsky's scaffolding, zone of proximal
Absolutely.
development.
That's right.
Absolutely. Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and Ayres sensory integration does not preclude bringing cognitive awareness to what you're doing. I think it's broader. In fact, I have argued against solely looking at sensory integration in its entirety as a bottom-up strategy. I think it's transactional between those social relationships, those sensory motor activities, and then getting to the adaptive response in complex participation, particularly in those joyful, playful activities where they, of course, just right challenge, and then they have a sense of success. And Ayres was very articulate about that self-actualization piece. So it was more than just, building a better motor skill, that, the children felt like they had agency. And so I think that I would have a broader perspective of the contribution of ASI.
No, I
There was
think,
an important question. Oops,
I was
sorry.
just going to say, I just more and more, I'm always aware that I think Ayres chose the word integration very intentionally, that she recognized that none of these functions are operating in silos, and that, everything affects everything else, and including those higher level functions, and occupation and participation were clearly part of that too. Yeah, go ahead, Connie. What were you going to say?
I saw a question flash. At what age can we expect chronologically there to be some capacity for this self-regulatory process? And 3.5 to 4 years is where we start to have more capacity to inhibit from the cortical parts of our brain. That's just the earliest beginning of that. It takes years. We don't fully mature our prefrontal frontal areas until our mid-20s, and that's, add 5 years if you've got a neurodivergent nervous system. It's going to take longer and slower. So the fact that we expect so much of our young children to self-regulate when they don't have the cortical capacities to do that, and then they get punished for it, that's a real concern of mine. And that's why I feel like, being able to get these messages and start to do some of that paradigm shift to understand the meaning of behaviors coming from safety, challenge, and threat, and to understand self-regulatory capacities take years to mature, really helps us have more compassion.
Thanks.
Well, maybe while Marco's scanning, let me just ask, I want to ask both of you, because a lot of people have been asking us about the effects of the pandemic. And I'm just wondering both of your thoughts on, considering resilience and in the developing nervous systems of, children who don't necessarily have any challenges going on, but also the vulnerabilities. We've certainly seen in our therapy practices, I'm sure you have too, Connie, and such an increase in need. And I know, Diane, that you were collecting normative data on the SPM2 that maybe crossed the pandemic. I'm just wondering if both of you might comment on. I don't know if we don't yet have enough time to look back to see what the impact has been, but so many people are asking. I'm just thought we'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Diane, go for it.
Yeah, I'm just thinking there, how to respond to this interesting question. But it just seems, like my first thought is, well, it depends, right? It depends on what was going on. Assuming that the children are spending time at home, right? Do they get any formal schooling time at home? It's possible, right? Because some families do homeschooling formally at home, versus a family at the other extreme would maybe be a family that their normal way of functioning is fairly disorganized compared to most families. So I would think that would make a big difference. That's my first thought. What do you think, Connie?
I really think that it's so contextually driven, and it's so got so many multi-factors, just multifactorial, as you said. So parents who were able, talk about self-regulation and cortical structures, who had enough executive function to start to manage and juggle having to have their children at home, and for them to either manage it while they were working through screen and had the capacity to keep their homes organized and rhythmic and playful and joyful. That's a certain subset. And many parents don't have that executive skill, haven't developed those functions as well to juggle that many items. And so those homes are going to be more chaotic, and the children were going to fall through the cracks. But in addition to that, even I think in addition, I've seen cases that have gone to real serious regressions in their nervous system from the pandemic in not being able to have their regular routine. So the structure of some of my older young adult autistic youth who have the structure of going to their volunteer work, of being able to go outdoors and have their rhythm of working, volunteering, taking a class, losing all that really deeply impacted their nervous system's function.
Yes, it becomes sort of a deprivation situation. Not even
Yes.
sort of, it is. It's
Yes.
deprivation compared to the normal kind of situation.
Yeah.
And
so
that's,
it became traumatic for them.
it's not good for brains, I think, at any age.
Well, and if you layer any toxic relationship, talking about toxic stress, that when people are able to get away from the home and they're only together for short periods, but if you have unhealthy relationships then that are forced together, I think that's been very difficult for some families. Hopefully not many, but definitely that's true of some.
Yeah, so being held captive and basically held hostage with your torturers or your abusers or your neglectors has had a profound effect as well.
Yeah.
We are reaching the end of the webinar, so we won't have time to answer all the questions that are coming, but I think I have two more questions I think would be good to think about it. One is, would looking at breath support be a good place to start when dealing with challenging active children? So breath or breathing exercises and that is one, and maybe another one before we go into the giveaway. A lot of people are asking, what should we do with people that don't see this as we see it and as we are discussing here? How do we convince people that these kids need support, and any advice that you might have to share with our audience, I think would be greatly appreciated.
As far as like starting with breathing, of course, one could start with breathing, and it's got a lot of connections to our bodies and our breathing and our heart rate and slowing everything down. But I'm just a huge proponent of individual differences. So you think of all the sensory modalities, each sensory modality, proprioceptive, vestibular, interoceptive, taste, smell, touch, all of them. What is the sensory preference for that child to be able to get to calm? For some, it's going to be music. For some, it's going to be touch. It's going to be deep touch pressure. For some, it's going to be skin brushing. For some, it's going to be, doing wall push-ups or the freeze dance. It has to be individualized. So you do your trial and error. You walk through all the sensory modalities and you discover together what calms that nervous system. And you can do that systematically by trying on and experimenting with each modality and then coming up with your top 3. What's one that I need to use when it's acute and I need something immediately to calm? What's something that might take longer, like taking a walk or going for a run? What's something that might take even longer, like roughhousing and wrestling with my dad and getting that proprioceptive input every night? So individualize, use all the senses, discover.
And this reminds me of a discussion I had with a previous student who was really passionate about the concept of educating the public about our sensory systems and sensory needs and how to think about integrating it into everyday life, thoughtfully, so that people of all ages she was thinking especially of children, but this really applies across the lifespan, that they are aware of their needs and know how to helpfully, in a very positive way, get those experiences that they need to feel okay.
And I know we have to close, but I just have one comment that the arousal systems, the autonomic systems, the reactivity, those modulatory systems are very personal. And one of the beautiful things you did on the SPM2 is to have self-report. And we have been asking adolescents to fill out that self-report, and it's dramatic how they understand their own nervous system and can say that, whereas adults around them may say they're fine, particularly girls. And so that subjective experience that isn't an externalizing behavior is so important in terms of the inquiry. And that's not something we can always garner from individuals who don't have language. But I do think that subjectivity of that personal lived experience is really important consideration.
Yeah. And then you can also look at the difference between, say, the primary caregiver or your parents' viewpoint of the adolescent versus the adolescent's own viewpoint of self. And are there major differences, which may help you as a clinician to have some insight into where to go, what are the priorities to work on.
Yeah,
It's beautiful because that matching and mismatching, you can pick up the mismatches and then you can help.
Yeah.
You can help them get in better sync with each other and respect their individual differences.
Yeah, and it's not that one's right and the other's wrong.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
It's a different experience. Yeah.
Yeah.
Different
well, ladies, we could spend a week. I'm sorry, I think I interrupted you, Diane. But
easily.
anyway, I want to thank you so much. I've got a couple things to share in closing, but I just wanted to thank you. You're amazing, and this discussion is a nice beginning to our study of the topic of sensory reactivity, sensory modulation, its impact in interacting systems on human function, and how to live a more joyful existence.
Good. Thank you, Suzanne, for your vision and inviting such great speakers and the topics you put together. I know our audience appreciates it, and I hope you know how much we appreciate you.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you
Thank you so much for
Thank you.
having
Just
us. It
don't
was
leave.
fun.
Don't leave
leave,
people.
because I
We still
want
have stuff.
I want you guys to know that beyond this hour, and I have to move my slides forward, we have more coming. So there's an international Congress. Here we go. Okay, I'm out of order. We have more dates in our Theory Tuesdays webinars. We will post them. We have exciting speakers coming up. Some names you may be familiar with in terms of the expertise in sensory integration and OT and other invited guests like Dr. Lillas. And so tune in. The International Council for Education in Ayres Sensory Integration is doing a beautiful webinar series on clinics around the world, featuring different areas, so different countries, different clinics, so tune in there. We also have our International Congress in Brazil, Rio de Janeiro. It's beautiful, so come and join October 12th. And of course, we have our certificate program. So if you want to go deep and get the in-depth training, we have our 6-module certificate program. So there's more to come. And here's our finale. And the winner is...
And the winner, if we are giving away, well, Southpaw is giving away an amazing prize, and Southpaw will be in contact with the winner, which is Sarah Schoen. Sarah, congratulations.
Sarah Schoen. Congratulations, Sarah. Our very own.
That's great.
Very own friend. So Sarah will be in touch with you so you can get your hands on the prize.
All right.
I'm
so
also
as-
happy to let my slides be sent out to everybody. So if that's something, I can send them to Suzanne and you can distribute them. I'm
Yeah,
more than
I'd like
happy.
them. Yeah.
Thank you.
that'd be
Yeah,
great.
Very
a
good.
lot of
A
people
lot
are
of
asking
people
for
ask
that.
for
Yeah.
that. So
Yeah, they're great.
So-
I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, I'm sure
Great.
people will be very, very happy with that. And just to say that we'll have a giveaway just like this one in every single session till the end of the year. So join us next time. As you saw, it is pretty amazing. Thank you all.
Okay.
Thank
stay-
you.
Marco,
Stay
and a
regulated, everybody.
Classy team.
Class.
Bye, everyone.
Bye for now.
Bye. Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
Diane.
Bye.
Connie.
Connie, it was
you.
fun. Thank you, Connie.
It was so great to be with
It was
you.
wonderful. It was wonderful. It was really fun. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I learned so much. Yeah, it's great.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Okay.